The wind carried the faint toll of the old church bell, though no hand had pulled its rope for years. Officer Daniel Mercer adjusted his collar against the night chill, the gravel crunching beneath his boots as his K-9 partner, Vex, stiffened at his side. The dog's gaze locked on the boarded windows of St. Bridget's Chapel, a stone relic on the edge of town that locals avoided after dusk. Vex didn't blink, didn't breathe easy. His hackles rose as though something inside that church was still alive and waiting. If you enjoy stories like this, where a single detail unravels everything, you might want to subscribe. It helps me keep bringing you tales that stay with you long after they end. The town of Dorchester lay 30 miles off the highway, a grid of quiet streets and farm fields that blurred into forest. People kept to themselves. Outsiders didn't stay long. The church stood at its northern edge, a black silhouette against the sky, its spire pointing like an accusation. Daniel slowed his patrol truck, headlights sweeping the chapel. Beside him in the passenger seat, Vex shifted, muscles tense, nose twitching toward the cracked stone steps. Daniel had grown used to the Malinois' moods, but this was different, focused, unshakable. The dog wasn't just alert. He was transfixed. Not tonight, Daniel muttered, reaching for the gear shift. But Vex whined low, a throaty sound that curled into marrow. The dog's paws pressed against the dashboard, his eyes fixed on the church door, as though something inside called his name. Daniel sighed, pulling the truck over. All right, we'll check it out. Quick look. He grabbed his flashlight, pushed open the door, and Vex leapt to the ground, already pulling at the leash. Gravel crunched underfoot as they approached the chapel. The air grew colder, carrying the smell of wet stone and old wood. Daniel swung the beam across the front. Boards nailed over windows, a lock rusting on the door, ivy crawling like veins up the walls. Nothing here, Daniel said, though his voice lacked conviction. Vex growled low and steady. His tail stood rigid, ears pricked. Then the dog froze, eyes fixed on a heavy oak door. The flashlight beam quivered in Daniel's hand. You smell something? Vex pressed his nose to the crack at the base of the door, whined, then sat, unmoving, unblinking, as though guarding a threshold no one should cross. Daniel's radio crackled at his shoulder. Mercer, you out near Bridges again? Sergeant Reeves's voice held a trace of irritation. Daniel pressed the mic. Yeah, Vex picked something up. He won't let it go. Dog's probably spooked by raccoons. You know how many complaints I've had about kids breaking in there over the years? Whole place is falling apart. I don't think it's raccoons, Daniel said. A pause and a sigh. Fine, but don't start a circus. Just check and clear it. The line went dead. Daniel studied the dog. Vex hadn't moved, eyes burning into the door. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the rustle of leaves. Daniel tried the handle. It didn't budge. The lock looked decades old, corroded around the edges. Still, something about the air made his skin crawl. He placed a hand on the rough wood, feeling the cold bleed through his palm. Not tonight, he whispered again. But Vex didn't follow when Daniel turned. He stayed planted, eyes fixed, a soldier refusing to leave the field. Daniel knelt beside him, scratching behind the ears. We'll come back. First light. Promise. Vex whined, reluctant, but finally rose and padded back toward the truck. The following morning, Dorchester woke to fog that rolled off the fields like smoke. Daniel drove past the diner, past shuttered shops, until the church rose out of the mist like a ghost. Vex stood in the back seat cage, pacing, eager, remembering the promise. Daniel parked by the sagging gate, stepped out, and heard the crunch of tires behind him. A second cruiser pulled up. Sergeant Reeves climbed out, his bulk wrapped in a tan jacket, breath steaming. You're really set on this, Reeves muttered, eyeing the chapel. Daniel shrugged. Dog won't let it go. Reeves spat into the weeds. Place is cursed. My grandmother wouldn't even walk past it. You know the story? Bits and pieces. Priest disappeared in the 70s. Never found. Parishioners stopped coming after kids swore they heard voices at night. Town locked it up, left it to rot. And nobody went looking for him. Not hard. Not for long. He was the kind of man people were glad to forget. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? Reeves didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a crowbar from the trunk. You want in? Let's get it over with. The rusted lock snapped after 2 strikes. The heavy oak door groaned open, hinges screaming into the fog. The smell hit them first. Damp earth, mildew, something metallic and sour beneath. Vex lunged forward, barking sharp and urgent. His nails scraped the stone floor as he pulled into the shadows. Daniel raised his flashlight. Dust swirled through the beam, catching on pews cloaked in cobwebs, hymnals rotting to pulp. Stained glass windows, what remained of them, cast fractured light, dull and broken. The air was heavy, suffocating. Dogs sure as hell worked up, Reeves muttered, stepping inside. The chapel swallowed their footsteps. Vex darted toward the altar, then froze, tail rigid, nose pressed to floorboards. He barked once, sharp. Daniel joined him, crouching low. The wood beneath was warped, darker in patches. He tapped it with his knuckles. Hollow. Reeves exhaled. Oh, hell. They pried the boards loose. Dust and rot spilled up, and beneath the altar yawned a narrow stairway, stone steps spiraling into blackness. The smell intensified, thick with decay. Daniel raised his light. The beam vanished into the pit, swallowed whole. Vex growled, ears pressed flat. Reeves shifted uneasily. We should call this in. Daniel shook his head. If there's someone down there, we don't wait. Reeves's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. They descended slowly, the stone slick with moisture. Each step echoed, swallowed by the dark. The air grew colder, wet, carrying the stench of rusted metal and something older, fouler. Vex led, his growls bouncing off the stone. At the bottom, the beam caught on chains bolted to the walls. Shackles, a rusted chair, scraps of fabric rotting in piles. Daniel's stomach turned. This wasn't no priest's chamber, Reeves whispered. Something skittered in the corner, rats scattering into holes. Then Daniel saw it, a wooden chest against the far wall. Iron hinges corroded, lid cracked. Vex barked, pulling toward it. Daniel raised the beam. The chest rattled. Reeves's face drained of color. Tell me you saw that. The lid shifted, a slow creak. A pale hand pushed through the gap, trembling, dirt-caked nails scratching the wood. Daniel froze, pulse hammering. The hand curled into a fist, then tapped once, twice, 3 times. The sound of that knock, 3 hollow taps inside the chest, clung to Daniel's bones like frost. The air hung heavy with mold and rust, but underneath it came another smell now. Sweat human, recent. Reeves swore under his breath, the crowbar shaking in his hands. Jesus Christ, there's someone alive in there. Daniel moved fast, sliding the beam of his flashlight over the iron latch. He jammed his hand against it, but the metal was fused with rust. The chest rattled again. A muffled cry seeped through, raw and desperate, sending Vex into a frenzy of barking. Help me with this. Daniel barked. Reeves staggered forward, jammed the crowbar into the seam. With a violent wrench, the hinge gave way, the lid swinging open on a scream of corroded iron. Inside lay a girl. No, not a girl. A young woman, maybe 20 at most, skin ghost white, eyes wide and unblinking. Her wrists bore raw bands of bruises where rope had rubbed her flesh raw. She gasped like she hadn't breathed in hours, gagging on the damp air. Holy hell! Reeves whispered, stepping back. Daniel dropped to his knees. It's okay. You're safe now. But she didn't look safe. She looked broken. Her lips trembled as she mouthed words he couldn't catch. Daniel leaned closer. Down, she whispered. There are more down. Her eyes darted toward the stone wall, to a gap half hidden by shadows. Vex growled low, for bristling, as though confirming the direction. Reeves grabbed Daniel's arm. We take her out, call this in. End the story. Daniel shook him off. She said there are more. And maybe she's out her mind. Reeves snapped. You want to chase phantoms in a tomb, be my guest. But I'm not dying in this shithole. Daniel met his eyes. For a second, he saw it. The fear, but also the reluctance. Not reluctance to risk his life. Reluctance to uncover what they might find. Sergeant, Daniel said slowly, What do you know about this place? Reeves's jaw clenched. Don't. The girl coughed, weak but insistent, clawing at Daniel's sleeve. Please. They'll come back. That decided it. Daniel lifted her from the chest. She weighed almost nothing, bones and trembling skin. He handed her to Reeves. Take her topside. Radio for medics. I said I'm not. Now. Daniel's tone cut like steel. Reeves hesitated, then slung her over his shoulder. His glare lingered a moment, something dark in it, before he turned toward the stairwell. Daniel watched the beam of his flashlight vanish up the spiral. Alone now. Save for Vex, the silence pressed in. The dog tugged toward the wall where the girl had pointed, whining. Daniel raised his light. There it was, a narrow slit in the stone, half collapsed, leading into deeper dark. The edges bore marks, scratched by fingernails until rock itself had grooved. Daniel's breath caught. All right, partner, he whispered. We go slow. The passage narrowed, forcing him sideways. The air thickened, stifling, carrying whispers of rot and old blood. His light wavered across claw marks etched into stone, faint carvings of crosses and names scratched by desperate hands. The tunnel opened suddenly into a chamber. Daniel froze. Bodies. Not corpses, statues. At least, that's what they looked like in the weak light. Figures slumped against the walls, skin waxen, eyes sunken. He raised the beam higher. They were people, emaciated, motionless, sitting in rows like parishioners waiting for a sermon that never ended. Then one stirred. A skeletal man lifted his head, eyes clouded but alive. His lips cracked apart. Please. Vex barked sharp, the sound shattering the stillness. Other heads turned, sluggish, drawn from whatever stupor they had sunk into. Groans rippled through the chamber. The sound of life smothered and starved. Daniel's throat tightened. He counted at least 12, maybe more. He reached for his radio. Dispatch! This is Officer Mercer. I need immediate. Static shrieked in reply. The signal strangled by stone. The groans shifted into murmurs. Words. Please. One voice rose above the rest, trembling. They said he'd save us. Said the Father would keep us clean. Daniel's blood chilled. Who? He asked. The man's eyes flicked toward the far wall. A door of iron bars stood there, heavy as a prison gate. Beyond it, darkness pulsed like a second heart. They kept us for him, the man whispered. Vex snarled at the gate, teeth bared. Daniel approached, beam steady. Scratches scarred the iron. The hinges bore fresh oil, unlike the rust above. Someone had been here recently. Someone still came. Footsteps sounded behind him. Daniel spun, flashlight beam slicing across stone. Reeves stood there, alone. The girl was gone. What the hell are you doing? Daniel demanded. Where is she? Reeves's face was unreadable. His gun rested easy in his hand. She won't be talking to anyone. The silence was deafening. You knew, Daniel said, voice raw. Reeves's jaw tightened. You think a place like this stays hidden for 40 years without someone in uniform keeping it that way? Daniel's stomach turned. How many? Enough. Reeves stepped closer, his eyes dark. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Walk away. Pretend this was empty. Go home to your son. Daniel's chest seized. He hadn't told Reeves about his boy. Not once. How do you... Small town. Reeves said flatly, I know everything. The prisoners whimpered, their voices trembling in the dark. Vex growled, pulling against the leash, muscles coiled. Daniel raised his gun, hands shaking. Move aside. Reeves's lips curled in a half-smile. You won't shoot me. Then he lifted his own weapon. The chamber went still. Two men mirrored in the dark. The prisoners held their breath. And in the silence came a new sound, metal scraping from beyond the bar gate. Slow, deliberate, like something dragging itself closer. Reeves's eyes flicked toward the gate, then back to Daniel. You don't want to see what's in there. Daniel's grip tightened on the trigger. Open it. Reeves shook his head. That's not a door you walk back from. The scraping grew louder. A shadow moved behind the bars, massive, hunched, shifting like it carried the weight of centuries. The prisoners whimpered louder now, some covering their ears, others whispering prayers. Vex barked and lunged, claws striking sparks off stone. Daniel's pulse roared. The shadow pressed closer, and in the dim light, he caught a glimpse. Not one figure, but many tangled, fused. Faces half-formed, mouths gasping in silent screams. Reeves raised his gun. Last warning, Mercer. Walk away. Daniel's finger brushed the trigger. The iron gate shuddered once. Then the lock snapped open. The gate swung inward on a scream of metal, the air rushing out like the exhale of a tomb. Daniel's flashlight beam shook as it fell across the figures inside. Not creatures, not demons, people, but twisted. Their bodies were gaunt, limbs bent at angles no joint should hold. Some crawled. Others dragged themselves upright, their skin scarred by years of chains. A dozen pairs of eyes blinked against the light, wide, empty, feral. And at their center, hunched against the wall, sat the largest shape of all, a man cloaked in rags, beard spilling down to his chest, eyes black and hollow. The father, one of the prisoners, whispered, clutching their knees. The ragged man lifted his head. His lips peeled back into a smile. "You brought him back," he croaked, voice rattling through the stone. Daniel's stomach dropped. Reeves lowered his gun, nodding slightly, respectfully, almost reverently. Daniel stared. "You're in on this?" Reeves's face hardened. "You don't understand. He keeps order. Always has." "Order?" Daniel hissed. "These people are... they're chosen." Reeves's eyes flicked toward the emaciated congregation. "Sacrifices for the good of the town. You think Dorchester stayed untouched all these years by chance? No violence, no plagues, no crops failing? The Father keeps it that way." Daniel's chest tightened. "That's superstition." Reeves's smile was grim. "Maybe, but it works. And I'll be damned before I let you ruin it." The ragged man, the Father, rose with a slow, shuddering grace. Chains clinked from his wrists, dragging along the floor. He spread his arms, bones crackling. "You bring me a dog," he rasped, eyes sinking into Vex's form. "Good. Pure." Vex snarled, hackles bristling, teeth bared. Daniel raised his gun, finger tense on the trigger. "Stay back." The Father laughed, dry as dust. "You can't kill what's already been given." Behind him, the others shifted, murmuring prayers, rocking in rhythm. Their voices grew, filling the chamber like a low chant. Reeves turned his weapon on Daniel. "Put it down." Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. The choice was a razor blade. He thought of his son, 10 years old, drawing pictures of Vex in school notebooks, waiting for his dad to come home safe. "No!" Daniel whispered. The gunfire cracked like thunder. Reeves staggered, shock flashing across his face before he dropped to his knees. Blood seeped through his jacket, pooling across the stone. Daniel's breath came ragged. His hands shook. "You..." Reeves choked, fury and disbelief tangled. "You doomed them all." His body fell forward. Still, the Father roared. Not human, not entirely. His followers surged from the gate, skeletal arms outstretched. Vex lunged, tearing free of the leash. He leapt at the first figure, teeth sinking deep, forcing them back. Daniel fired again and again, the chamber exploding in muzzle flash and screams. But there were too many. Hands clawed at his jacket, his arms, trying to drag him down. He slammed one against the wall, another against the floor, firing point blank. Blood sprayed. The stench of gunpowder mixed with rot. Vex tore through another, but yelped as fingers raked across his flank. Rage exploded in Daniel's chest. He emptied the magazine, bodies collapsing, shrieking, until only silence remained. Smoke hung thick. The Father stood untouched. His eyes glowed faintly, black pits rimmed with silver. Daniel's hand shook as he reloaded, but before he could raise the weapon, the old man spoke. "You don't stop it. You only take its place." Then he collapsed, bones crumbling, flesh sagging, as though time itself devoured him. His followers twitched once, then fell still, Lifeless husks littering the stone. The chamber went quiet. Only Daniel's ragged breathing and Vex's low whine filled the dark. By the time backup arrived, Daniel had already carried 2 survivors out of the underground. Most had died where they sat. The medics swarmed, voices clipped, urgent, dragging stretchers through fog. The sheriff's office lit up with questions, but answers were scarce. Reeves's body was taken under silence. No mention of his words. No mention of the father. They called it a forgotten dungeon. A crime scene sealed by decades of corruption. Nothing more. Daniel said little. He went home with Vex, sat in his son's room, and listened to the boy's soft breathing as he slept. But at night, the words echoed. You don't stop it. You only take its place. And sometimes in the silence before dawn, Vex would stir, ears pricking, eyes locked on the window, staring at something Daniel could not see. Resolution. The church was torn down months later, reduced to rubble under the sun. Crops withered the following season. Cattle sickened. Accidents doubled. Folks whispered it was coincidence. Bad luck. Daniel knew better. He never spoke of what he'd seen. But every Sunday he walked past the empty lot where St. Bridget's once stood. Vex always paused, ears forward, body rigid, watching, waiting. The town kept moving, blind to the shadow it fed. But Daniel carried alone the weight of a secret no one would ever believe. And each time the wind carried the faint toll of a bell that no longer existed, Daniel felt the hair rise on his neck, certain that some debts had not been paid. The father was gone, but the silence he left behind was not peace. It was only waiting.